Welcome to my May essay. This is an essay called Odes to Community Performance, and instead of a traditional essay this month, I ended up writing 10 anecdotes about community performance. I feel like a lot of folks are in student showcase mode for the end of the year, and so this seemed like a good time to talk about the relationship of institution, especially art institutions, to community, movement, and performance. 1. A student of mine was in town a few weeks ago performing at our school with his young professional circus company. We didn't have much time to catch up, but he had some big news. His company had landed an agent. He was so proud and happy. This was a big step towards the bigger break and more full-time work. The bigger gigs are great, he said, but I actually prefer the smaller shows at circus schools. There's something real about them. We had this show the other week at a circus school, and it was probably the best audience I've had for one of these shows. They were so stoked. The money of the bigger gigs is obviously a big draw, but being able to see and connect with the audience seemed really important to him. 2. Many years ago, pre-pandemic, two friends of mine were featured at a festival that I co-produced in New York City. The piece they presented was expressive and technically jaw-dropping. It was a full-length show. It was the kind of show that made you sit on the edge of your seat and want to just make more art. The show landed them an international agent, and they took it on tour in Europe. They're one of the few American circus companies to land a tour like this. It's happened a few more times since 2015, but it felt like a really big moment. When they got back from the tour, I was catching up with one of them, and they said the experience had felt surprisingly kind of hollow. The dark theaters, the lights. I miss the DIY shows, they said, where we performed in old warehouses and the audience was just full of our friends. I was reminded that I'd seen one of those warehouse shows, and they were awesome in a way that's kind of hard to put my finger on, can be hard to describe. 3. I used to work with and around this longtime circus whiz who had multiple grad degrees, ran a company that performed in parks and schools and libraries and anywhere they could find a spot, and they were really at home on makeshift stages. They'd been around for a while when I arrived in New York City, and I think they're still around. They never really spoke against the art establishment explicitly, but I always wondered why they never aimed at a different target or a larger market. At the time, I was working to connect circus to the establishment through advocacy and producing with the NEA, with larger New York theaters, and I was getting some flack from more classical or heritage circus folk, and I never quite understood why. And none of them could quite articulate why in a way that I could understand either. I think I get it a bit better now. 4. A non-circus friend recently attended an adult student showcase at the school where I used to be head coach. It was so sincere, he said afterward. And sometimes I was really on the edge of my seat because it seemed like these folks shouldn't be able to do the things that they were doing. To say that there was a magic in the rawness of that student showcase is way too grandiose. The show was a bit silly and there were compelling moments that weren't always the ones the students wanted to be compelling, but it did succeed at a sort of sincerity that polished performance never quite replicates. The cheering was intense. The seats were not comfortable. The lights were never all the way off. They didn't achieve that movie theater darkness. We could watch the performers walk on stage in the semi-dimness. 5. Why does the word community art often carry a negative connotation? When did student showcases become synonymous with low quality or boring? Why does professional art get all the praise? These questions really bother me, especially since the pandemic. It doesn't seem to emerge from anyone's actual experiences of community performance. I can honestly say that most, if not all, of the community performance I've been to, the audiences and the performers all seem to be just having a great time. So there must be some narrative somewhere in the media that makes us feel differently, that sends us this message. There must be a source for this message, that community performance is somehow bad or lesser than. Shows like Glee or movies like Waiting for Guffman may cut like double-edged swords. Community performance is a place for outcasts or weirdos. Seems to be a recurring premise to work like this. On the one hand, this creates a safe space for outcasts and weirdos. But on the other hand, it prevents a really full-throated celebration of community performance by the mainstream. 6. I have an ongoing conversation with a producer friend about public space. What makes a space public? Is it openness, a sense of ownership by the community? Theaters, despite ostensibly being community engaged with the community or goaled around the community, often feel exclusive, usually because of ticket prices that are necessarily high in order to pay the artists and the technicians. This is a tricky knot to untie. But street shows, library shows, student showcases, these feel more undeniably public. They're accessible, welcoming, real. They bring people together in ways that professional theaters try to, but don't often succeed at. Part of this ongoing conversation about public space is also about circus. The same producer friend says, kindly and with great tact, that circus struggles to transcend, look what I can do. I don't disagree with this. The trick is foundational to circus, and lots of really smart people consider circus and circus arts to be related to the trick. The trick is the building block that makes circus unique from dance or theater, and tricks are, at their base, look what I can do. I suppose where I disagree with my friend is around the need to transcend the trick. I don't think the trick needs to be transcended. Look what I can do inspires us to imagine and enact impossible things. If someone can ride a unicycle on a tight wire, shouldn't we be able to save the environment? Circus doesn't need a story, it doesn't need music, because it rests on a different bedrock than these things. Look what I can do easily turns into look what we can do when communities do it together. 7. Between 2008 and 2009, I interned with the San Francisco Mime Troupe, known for their DIY shows and parks. I actually wonder if they're still around. I helped to build sets and props. I occasionally assisted during performances. There was a sense of community there, a sense of being a part of something that mattered, something that was important, something with tradition in it. The shows were free, open to everyone. They performed in the city parks, and the audience was always a mix of locals and curious visitors. It felt like the whole city came alive for these performances. The work felt important, even if it was lo-fi, and the shows were good. People laughed, people stayed, people dropped money in the hat when it was passed afterwards. 8. After the pandemic, I began to track how my body felt at different shows. At professional theaters, I've always felt a kind of tension, a pressure to be a good audience, to fit in, to clap when everyone clapped, to offer perspectives on the performer's skill, to educate on circus or athletic history. At arena shows and sports stadiums, I get easily overwhelmed by the number of people and how far away the performers are. At community shows, my body relaxes. There is a sense of belonging, a connection to something intensely local, something personal. It's fun to watch students post pictures and videos of the performance, using it as a kind of self-portraiture. I think social media is powerful in this way. I think you can use image and art to create a sort of digital self-portrait. I encounter my tension with this when we forget that the artifice of this self-portrait is artifice, that we are not our social media personas. 9. Community art is a tool of the working class. It is not art with a capital A. It is a foundation of unionization, of protest, of collective power. It's about art made by friends, families, kids, art that brings people together and gives them something to talk about. Art teachers and movement teachers play a critical role in this. We either teach people to question authority, to embrace discomfort, or we don't teach them this. Art, with a capital A, is a weapon that is used to maintain and reproduce cultural hierarchy, even when it cosplays as an ally. It has been a weapon ever since it was siloed off into colleges and professionalized. There's a fantastic book called Highbrow Lowbrow by Lawrence Levine, which traces this change over the past century, half by looking at Shakespeare, which was popular and widely accessible in the 1800s, and the rise of symphony orchestras, which, while popular in Europe at the time, were not widely accepted in the States in the early 1900s. These big art centers try to be community hubs, but they often miss the mark. They bring art to the people, but they don't bring out the art in people. I'm not saying this can't be done through institutions or that the people involved don't have their hearts in the right place. They absolutely do. The rules of that game make it too hard. The internet has shaken up that world, the world of institutionalized art, in a big way. College has become prohibitively expensive in the United States, and so many creative careers are available without going to art school. Social media platforms, while connecting people across geography, are also diminishing the impact and interest that we have in local art making. They can create a sense of grandeur when a community, an internet community, spans international boundaries, but they often come at the expense of local connections. The irony of writing this to my international community who read my essays after having left my cushy job at my local circus school is not lost on me. 10. I wonder if we can reclaim community art as our generation ages. If we can relearn the tools that make community shows really good. Not just good because they're building community, but actually good. There is a craft to street performance, to community performance, to making magic when the lights don't go all the way off. This skill, this craft, doesn't translate well into video, and so it's hard to learn about it. And the less it happens, the less we see really good community art, the harder it is to make and the more it vanishes. I am excited by this proposition, the proposition that community art can be wildly good, incredibly successful, and can happen without the support of lots of tech, can happen without the dark room and the cushy seats. I think that is a mission worth fighting for.